The wind that rolled across the desert carried the dry scent of dust and cedar. It was the kind of air that told stories, whispering across the canyons and over the old bones of forgotten wars. The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs, turning the sky into a wash of orange and gold. Down in the wide basin, where the shadows grew long and the air turned cool, a lone Apache warrior rode his weary horse along a trail only the old ones remembered. His dark hair was bound with a single leather tie, his eyes sharp and quiet, watching the earth as if listening for its secrets. He had no name that anyone in the nearby settlements would remember. Some said he was the last of a dying band, one who refused to bow to the world that had taken everything from him. Others believed he was a ghost of the mountains, a spirit bound to the desert winds. But to himself, he was simply a man with too much blood on his hands and too many voices in his memory. He rode not for war, but for meaning. The land no longer offered either. That evening, the warrior came upon something strange near a dry riverbed, a half-buried wagon. Its wooden frame cracked by sun and time. The wheels were snapped, the canvas torn, and the smell of old fire hung around it. A few scraps of fabric fluttered in the wind, pale against the sand. He dismounted, his moccasins sinking into the soft earth, and studied the scene in silence. The prints around the wagon were faint but clear enough for a man like him to read. There had been horses, boots, and smaller footprints, some running, some dragged. He traced them with his eyes, his instincts whispering that something terrible had happened here. Then came the sound, a faint cry carried on the wind, thin and weak. He turned toward it, his hand tightening around his knife. It was not the cry of an animal, it was human. Moving quietly, he followed the sound toward a small rise in the ground. There, half hidden under a blanket of dirt and brush, lay a young woman. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dust and blood. She looked barely alive. Her lips moved, but no sound came at first. The warrior knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse was there, fragile but steady. He poured a bit of water from his skin pouch onto her lips, watching her flinch at the touch before her eyes fluttered open. They were pale eyes that had seen too much. When she saw him, fear flared across her face. She tried to crawl away, but her body was too weak to obey. The warrior raised a hand, speaking in a calm, low tone she didn't understand, but somehow trusted. She stilled, her breath ragged, and stared at him as though caught between terror and hope. He knew the look well. He had seen it in the eyes of those caught between 2 worlds, the old and the new, the living and the lost. Slowly, he tore a strip from his own sleeve and wrapped it around the gash on her arm. Her voice trembled when it finally broke through the silence. "They left me," she whispered, her words scraping the air. "They said I slowed them down. They took everything." Her voice faded, and she closed her eyes again, slipping back into a faint. The warrior's gaze moved toward the horizon, where the last light of day bled into the coming night. He understood betrayal. He had seen men turn on their own kind for less. But something about her presence stirred something buried deep in him, something he thought long dead. He lifted her carefully, cradling her against him as he walked back to his horse. She weighed little more than a child. He placed her in the saddle, mounted behind her, and turned toward the cliffs to the east, where an old cave hid behind a curtain of rock. As the night wind rose, he rode without a sound, his thoughts heavy with questions he couldn't yet name. When dawn broke, the cave was lit by a soft glow of firelight. The woman slept wrapped in a blanket, her breathing slow and steady. The warrior sat near the entrance, sharpening a flint knife, his eyes scanning the desert below. He had found her by chance, or so it seemed, but the land had its ways. Sometimes what was buried wanted to be found. When she finally stirred awake, she looked around, her confusion clear. He offered her more water and a small piece of dried meat. She hesitated, then accepted it. The silence between them was deep, but not uncomfortable. After some time, she began to speak again, her voice stronger than before. Her name was not important, not yet, but her story was one of betrayal and loss. She had been part of a small wagon train heading west, chasing the promise of a new beginning. Somewhere near the borderlands, they were ambushed not by natives, as most would think, but by their own kind. 2 men from their group, hired to guide them through Apache country, had turned on them in the night. They stole the supplies, the horses, and left the rest to die. She had tried to follow, but a blow to the head ended her pursuit. When she awoke, the desert was silent, and she was alone. The warrior listened without interruption, his gaze steady on the flames. He knew that kind of cruelty. He had seen white men betray white men, just as he had seen Apache betray Apache. It was not race or tribe that brought betrayal, it was greed and fear. When she finished her story, he simply nodded, as though confirming something he had always known. She asked who he was, but he gave no name. He told her only that he once fought for people who no longer existed, and now he fought only for the land that still remembered them. She studied him for a long moment, then whispered a quiet thank you. It was the first time he had heard that word in years. The following days passed in a quiet rhythm. He helped her regain her strength, teaching her how to find water hidden beneath stones and how to move silently across the rocky terrain. At first, she moved with hesitation, but she learned quickly. There were moments when their eyes met and neither spoke, yet something unspoken grew between them, a fragile bond, built on shared survival. But the peace was short-lived. One night, as they camped near the edge of the basin, the warrior caught sight of movement in the distance. Torches flickered 4, maybe 5 riders. He watched them through narrowed eyes, reading their posture and the way they moved. These were not Apache warriors. No. Their gear was too clean, their movements too careless. He turned to the woman. "Those men," he said quietly. "They are looking for something." Her face paled as realization dawned. "It's them," she whispered. "The men who left me." The warrior's jaw tightened. He had known it before she spoke, but hearing it filled the air with tension that clung like dust. He doused the fire and motioned for her to stay silent. They moved higher into the rocks, finding shelter behind a ledge overlooking the trail. Below, the riders paused, their torches lighting the path she and the warrior had taken. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "They'll kill us if they find us." He met her gaze calm and unwavering. "Then they will have to climb high enough to meet their ghosts." The night stretched on, heavy with waiting. The torches flickered closer, the sound of hooves echoing against the canyon walls. The warrior's hand rested on the handle of his knife, his heart beat steady. The woman pressed her hand against her chest, praying silently to a god she wasn't sure was listening. Somewhere below, one of the riders called out a rough voice, mocking and cruel. The sound carried through the still air. The warrior did not move. He waited, his eyes dark as the stone around them. And as the torches drew nearer, lighting the sharp faces of the rocks, the woman turned to him, whispering words that trembled in the darkness. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the men below. But there was something in his silence, his story buried deep, waiting to be unearthed. Then came the sound of a gun being cocked, sharp and clear against the quiet desert night. The first rider raised his weapon toward the rocks, and the warrior's hand closed around his knife. The air hung between them, tight as a drawn bowstring. The desert held its breath, waiting for the moment when the past and present would collide, and the story of a betrayed woman and a haunted Apache would begin to carve its mark into the sands of time. The first shot split the silence of the canyon. It struck a stone near the ledge and sent a cloud of dust into the air. The woman gasped, pressing herself against the rock. While the warrior remained still, his eyes tracking the riders below, the men shouted to one another, their torches waving like fire spirits in the darkness. They were hunting, and they believed their prey was close. The warrior motioned for her to stay down. Moving silently, he crept to the edge and studied the riders. There were 4 of them, rough-looking men with weathered faces and cruel mouths. They carried rifles and wore hats pulled low over their eyes. Their voices carried a confidence that came only from doing bad things too many times without consequence. The warrior recognized that arrogance it was the same kind that had burned villages and broken treaties. He turned back toward her, whispering in a low tone. "They move like men who know no fear." Her voice shook. "They don't. They think nothing can touch them." The warrior's expression did not change, but inside, he felt something stir, quiet anger that had slept too long. He watched them dismount and scatter to search among the rocks. One of the men held something that caught the firelight. It was a pendant silver with a small engraving. The woman saw it and froze. He took it from me. Her hands trembled, and she turned her face away as if the sight of it burned. The warrior glanced at her, understanding that the pain she carried went beyond what words could hold. To her, those men weren't just thieves. They were the embodiment of betrayal itself. The night deepened, and the air grew colder. The riders continued their search, unaware that two pairs of eyes watched them from above. The warrior waited, listening to their footsteps, memorizing their positions. His people had taught him patience, how to let time become a weapon. The woman tried to stay calm, but every sound below made her flinch. At last, one of the men called out to the others, "Ain't nothin' here but rocks and shadows. She's gone, or dead already." The others grumbled in agreement. They kicked at the dirt, spat into the fire, and cursed the cold. The warrior watched as they mounted their horses again, their torches flickering as they rode off into the distance. But his instincts told him it wasn't over. Men like that didn't give up easily. When the last echo of hoofbeats faded, he rose and helped her to her feet. She was shaking, though whether from fear or cold, he couldn't tell. He guided her back to the small cave they had left behind, and they sat in silence by the dying embers of the fire. After a while, she spoke. "They weren't always like that. It's the man with the scar. He used to work for my father back east. He said he'd help us cross the plains safely." We believed him. Her voice broke, and she rubbed her arms, as if trying to wipe away the memory. "My father was a merchant. We came west to start again, after the sickness took my mother. But the desert doesn't care about hopes. It only takes." The warrior nodded slowly. "The desert gives nothing unless you learn to listen." She looked at him, her eyes tired but curious. "And what has it given you?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the cave's mouth, where the first pale light of dawn was spreading across the horizon. "Once it gave me a reason to fight," he said quietly, "and it took it away." There was something in his tone, something hollow, carved by loss. She didn't press him for more. Instead, she leaned back against the cold wall, drawing the blanket closer around her shoulders. When she fell asleep, the warrior sat awake, listening to the wind whispering outside. He thought of the world that used to be his, the camps, the dances, the laughter that once echoed through the valleys. All gone now. The white man's railroads had carved the land open, and the rivers of his people's past had dried beneath them. Yet here he was, protecting a stranger from that same world. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because, somewhere in her eyes, he saw the same kind of pain that had followed him for years. The next day they moved east, keeping to the ridges where they could see far without being seen. The woman's strength was returning, though she still limped when the ground grew rough. The warrior taught her how to read signs of movement, the broken branches, the faint prints in the dust, the silence of birds when danger was near. She learned quickly, surprising him more than once. In return, she told him small things about her old life, the way the river near her home froze in winter, how her mother used to sing while sewing by lamplight. It was a world so different from his that it sounded almost like a story from another time. Yet in those small details he found a kind of peace. They came across the ruins of an old mission 2 days later, half swallowed by sand. Its bell tower leaned at an angle, and the cross atop it was rusted and broken. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and old prayers. The warrior searched the shadows for signs of recent travelers, but the place was empty. "This was once a place of faith," the woman said softly. "Now it's just bones." He looked around at the crumbling walls. "Faith is like a fire. Leave it too long without tending, and it dies." They decided to rest there for the night. As darkness fell, she sat by the broken altar, while he built a small fire with what dry wood he could find. She looked up at the cracked ceiling, where faint stars showed through the gaps. "Do you ever wonder if the land remembers what it was before all this?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "It remembers everything. That is why it never sleeps." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment. There was something in his calmness that unsettled her, not fear, but an awareness that he carried more than he showed. She wanted to ask what ghosts followed him, but she held her tongue. Some truths, she sensed, weren't meant to be spoken yet. As the night deepened, he rose and stepped outside, drawn by an uneasy feeling in his chest. The air was still, too still. He scanned the horizon. In the far distance, faint as candlelight, he saw something glimmer. It wasn't fire, it was the reflection of metal, a rifle barrel catching the moonlight. He returned to the mission and spoke quietly. "We're not alone." The woman stiffened. "Them again?" He nodded once. "They've been following since we left the canyon." Her face went pale. "What do? We wait," he said simply. "The land will tell us what comes next." Hours passed with no movement, but neither of them slept. The warrior sat near the door, knife in hand, his eyes fixed on the dark. The woman stayed close, her fingers twisting the edge of her blanket. She didn't know whether to be terrified or strangely comforted by his presence. When morning came, the threat seemed to vanish with the darkness. Yet the warrior's instincts didn't ease. He knew the riders would return. Men like that always did. As they prepared to leave, he noticed something etched into one of the mission's old stones, a symbol of the Apache people, faded but still visible. He ran his fingers over it, feeling a chill of recognition. It was a mark used long ago, by his own tribe, to warn of betrayal and blood. He stared at it for a long time, then turned away, his jaw tight. The woman noticed the change in his face. "What is it, old ghosts?" he said. "Ones that walk where they shouldn't?" The road ahead stretched endless, lined with dust and memory. The woman followed close behind him, her heart heavy with the fear that the past she fled was still hunting her. The warrior, though silent, carried a burden of his own, the weight of knowing that every trail they took was leading them deeper into a story neither of them fully understood. As the sun sank once more behind the red cliffs, they reached a narrow pass between two walls of stone. The wind howled through it like a warning. The warrior stopped, raising a hand for silence. From somewhere ahead came the faint sound of metal clinking against stone. The woman's breath caught. "Is it them?" He looked into the shadows ahead, his expression unreadable. "It's something," he said quietly. "Whatever it is, it knows we're coming." The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of smoke and something else, something that did not belong. The warrior's hand moved to the knife at his belt and his eyes narrowed. Behind them, the desert seemed to close its mouth, as though holding its breath for what was about to unfold. The narrow pass swallowed them whole, the walls rising high on either side like the ribs of some ancient beast. The wind that funneled through it carried a low hum, the kind that made the skin prickle. The warrior moved first, his steps measured and silent. The woman followed close behind, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The sound she had heard, the faint clink of metal, came again, this time sharper, closer. The warrior raised a hand for her to stop, crouched low, pressing his ear to the cold earth. Beneath the rush of the wind, he heard a horse shifting its weight, the creak of leather. Someone was waiting ahead. He motioned for her to stay where she was, then moved forward alone, melting into the rocks. The woman's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She watched his shape disappear into the gloom, feeling a strange ache of trust and fear. The desert was full of ghosts, and she didn't want him to become one of them. She knelt behind a boulder, gripping the pendant he had retrieved for her days ago. It had been her mother's, a reminder that goodness once lived in the world. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then, from somewhere ahead, came the low murmur of voices. The warrior's sharp eyes caught movement near the bend in the pass. 3 men stood with their horses tied to a scrub tree. One of them wore a familiar hat, the same man who had carried the silver pendant. The warriors studied their positions. They weren't expecting an ambush. They were waiting for someone. He crept closer, his moccasins soundless against the dirt. As he neared, their words became clearer. "She's alive," one of them said. "Saw the smoke from her camp near the old mission. She's got someone with her." "An Apache," another replied with a sneer. "Figures. She'll get what's coming, same as the rest of them." The third man spat into the dust. "Boss wants her found. Says she's got something that belongs to him. That map ain't worth a damn without her memory to read it." The warrior's brows furrowed. A map. So that was what this was about. Not revenge, not chance. These men weren't hunting her because she slowed them down. They needed her. He slipped back through the shadows, returning to where she waited. When she saw him, she started to rise, but he raised a hand. "Quiet," he whispered. "They wait ahead. They speak of a map." Her eyes widened. A map. She looked shaken, searching her memory. My father carried one. He said it led to a silver vein hidden in these lands. The kind that could change a man's fortune. The warrior's expression darkened. Fortune brings nothing but blood. Silver draws greed, like water draws flies. She nodded slowly, guilt flickering in her eyes. I didn't know they would turn. I thought they were only men trying to survive the journey. They were, he said. Until they weren't. They stayed there for a while, the wind carrying the smell of dust and sweat from the men ahead. The warrior's instincts told him to strike before the riders moved again. But another part of him, an older, wiser part, whispered patience. He had seen enough killing to know that battles fought too soon could cost more than they saved. They waited until nightfall. When the stars came out, the warrior led her up a steep path that curved around the pass, moving above their enemies rather than through them. From that high ground they could see far across the basin. In the distance, small fires flickered. More men, maybe a dozen or more. They've got others, the woman said softly. They must have sent word after me. The warrior nodded. This is no simple chase. They mean to corner us. She looked down at the fires, her face pale in the moonlight. If they find me, they'll kill you too. He didn't answer. In his heart, he already knew the truth. Fate had tied their paths together now, whether by mercy or curse. As the night wore on, they took shelter beneath an overhang, too exposed to risk a fire. The woman couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the map her father had once shown her, drawn on thick parchment with careful ink. He'd told her it wasn't just about silver, it was about legacy, about proving that their family's name could mean something again after losing everything back east. Now that dream had turned into a nightmare. When dawn broke, the warrior was already awake, scanning the land below. The riders were gone, their fires cold. That was worse. He knew men like them didn't simply give up, they were spreading out, setting traps, waiting for him to make a mistake. They continued east, following a dried-up river that wound through canyons like a scar. The air grew cooler, the wind sharper. Ravens circled overhead, their cries echoing off the cliffs. The woman tried to keep up, though the rocky terrain tore at her shoes. By midday, they reached an abandoned mining camp, the skeletons of wooden shacks leaning in the wind. The warrior searched them carefully, finding a rusted lantern and a few tools left behind. The place had been deserted for years, but something about it made the air feel heavy, like the land itself remembered pain. This was where it began, the woman said quietly. My father came here once before he died. He said the mine was cursed. Men disappeared trying to dig deeper. He believed the land didn't want to give up what it held. The warrior knelt near the entrance of a collapsed tunnel, touching the blackened earth. He was right. The land takes back what men steal from it. Before she could reply, a sound broke the quiet, a distant shout, followed by the crack of gunfire. Both turned sharply toward the ridge. Dust plumed against the sky. The riders had found them. The warrior grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the narrow path leading behind the mine. They ran, the sound of hooves growing louder behind them. Bullets struck the rocks, sending shards flying. The woman stumbled, but he caught her arm and kept her moving. They reached a steep incline where the rocks formed a natural wall. He boosted her up, then climbed after her, pressing them both against the stone as the riders thundered below. From their hiding place, they watched the men spread out through the ruins of the camp. One of them dismounted and kicked open a shack door, shouting curses into the emptiness. Another laughed, holding up a small, torn scrap of parchment he'd found on the ground. That's part of the map, the woman whispered. They must have dropped it when we fled the wagon. The warrior's jaw tightened. Then they'll never stop. They stayed there until the riders moved off again, heading deeper into the canyon. The woman's breathing slowed, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. We can't keep running forever, she said quietly. He looked at her, his gaze steady. Then we don't run. We make them come to us. That night, they built a small trap near the mine's entrance, nothing more than loosened stones and narrow choke points. The warrior moved with silent precision, his hands steady, his focus unwavering. The woman watched him, realizing that he wasn't just a fighter. He was a man shaped by survival, by an understanding of the land that went deeper than words. When they finished, they sat in the cold together, the stars burning above them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she turned to him, her voice low. You could have left me, you should have. Why didn't you? He looked at her for a moment before answering. "'Cause once, someone found me when I was lost. I was not left to die." She didn't ask who that someone was. The way he spoke told her the story was too painful to tell. Before dawn, the sound of hooves returned. The riders had found their trail again. The warrior stood, knife in hand, his eyes sharp and calm. The woman crouched beside him, clutching a small stone in her fist, her heart pounding. From the ridge above, the first rider appeared, scanning the ground. The trap was set, the air still as death. The warrior waited for the perfect moment, but just as he prepared to strike, another sound cut through the canon, a different voice, calling out not in anger, but in warning. It came from the opposite ridge, echoing faintly. The warrior turned toward it, his instincts flickering with recognition. The voice spoke in Apache. It was a message, one meant for him. The words chilled him to the bone. Someone from his own people was near, and they were hunting too. The woman saw the change in his face. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the ridge, where a shadow moved against the morning light. The danger had doubled, and the land, once quiet, now held the breath of two worlds colliding, one chasing silver, the other chasing ghosts. The war between them was only beginning. The first rays of morning stretched across the canyon, painting the cliffs in gold and crimson, but the beauty of it felt wrong against the air that now pulsed with danger. The warrior stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the ridge where the voice had come from. The woman followed his gaze but saw only shifting shadows among the rocks. To her it was only wind and light. To him it was something far older, something he knew deep in his bones. He motioned for her to stay down. "Someone from my people is near," he said quietly. "But not all who carry my blood are friends." Her breath caught. "They're after us too?" He gave a slow nod. "They hunt the same prize." She turned pale. The silver. "No," he said, his tone firm. "They hunt what the silver took from them, the land, the spirit, the truth that was buried under greed." Below them, the riders who had chased them through the canyon were spreading out again, searching among the rocks. The sound of hooves and shouts echoed through the narrow space, bouncing off the stone walls. The warrior studied their movements, but his mind was elsewhere. If the voice he heard belonged to who he thought it did, then things were about to turn far worse. He had once fought beside that voice a man named Deer Eyes, an Apache tracker who had chosen to work with white men after the wars ended. They had shared fire and blood, but time and betrayal had turned them into strangers. If Deer Eyes was here, it meant someone had paid him to be. The woman touched his arm. "You know him?" The warrior's jaw tightened. "I knew the man he used to be. I don't know what he's become." The sound of rocks shifting nearby cut their exchange short. The warrior turned sharply, spotting a movement along the ledge above them, a flicker of shadow, quick and deliberate. Someone was watching. He gestured for the woman to move closer, guiding her into the mouth of a narrow crack in the rock. They squeezed through the passage until it opened into a small, hollow space, hidden from sight but offering a narrow view of the canyon below. From there they watched as two of the outlaws dismounted and began climbing the slope toward the mine. One carried a rifle, the other a length of rope. The warrior read their intent instantly. They meant to trap them. But what caught his attention more was a faint glint from higher up, near the ridge where the voice had come from. Another man knelt there, bow drawn. The woman whispered, "Is he one of them?" The warrior shook his head. "No, that's Deer Eyes." As if in answer, the arrow flew. It struck one of the outlaws square in the chest, knocking him backward into the rocks. The second outlaw fired his gun wildly toward the ridge, shouting curses. The warrior grabbed the woman's arm. Now he hissed, pulling her from the hollow. They scrambled along the rocks, keeping low as bullets cracked behind them. The echo of each shot seemed to chase them through the pass. When they reached the next ridge, they could see Deer Eyes clearly now, a tall man with long braids and a face marked by old scars. He lowered his bow slowly, his expression unreadable. The warrior stopped several paces away, his body tense. "You shouldn't be here," he called out. Deer Eyes' voice carried icily over the wind. "Neither should you." He took a step forward, eyes narrowing as he studied the woman. "You carry something dangerous, white woman? It has cost too much already." She glanced at the warrior, confusion flashing across her face. "I don't want it," she said quickly. "I never did." Deer Eyes looked at her for a long moment, then turned his gaze back to the warrior. You should have left her to the desert? You think you can save what cannot be saved? The warrior's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at his belt. She is not the enemy. Deer Eyes gave a cold smile. Everything that draws blood from the earth is an enemy. Before either could speak again, a shot rang out from below. The outlaws had spotted them. The bullet struck the rock between the two Apache men, splintering it into sharp fragments. Both dove for cover as the woman screamed. The canyon exploded with sound shouts, gunfire, the thundering of hooves. The outlaws had regrouped and were climbing the slope in force now, their rifles flashing in the rising sun. Deer Eyes rolled behind a boulder, firing an arrow that dropped another man instantly. The warrior returned fire with a pistol he had taken from the wagon days before. The woman crouched low, her heart hammering, clutching the dirt like it could hold her still. The air filled with dust and smoke. Every sound blurred together, the screams of men, the echo of gunfire, the hiss of arrows slicing through the air. It was chaos, raw and wild. Then came a shout louder than the rest. The girl's up there. Don't shoot her. Bring her down alive. The warrior's stomach turned cold. The outlaws didn't care about him or Deer Eyes. They wanted her. He turned to her quickly. We move now, but they'll see us. They'll see us if we stay. He took her hand and led her down a narrow ledge, moving fast, but careful. Bullets tore through the air behind them, struck close enough to send a spray of stone against her face. She stumbled, but he pulled her forward until they reached the cover of a large rock formation. From there, they could see the lower basin and open stretch, leading toward the next canyon. If they could reach it, they might have a chance. But between them and that open space were 6 armed men. The warrior studied the path, his mind racing. Behind them, Deer Eyes continued to fight, his arrows swift and deadly. For a brief moment, the two sides' gunfire clashed like thunder. Then above the noise, the woman heard something else, a strange rumble, deep and growing. The ground, she gasped, shaking. The warrior looked down. Dust was rising from the earth in small clouds. A low groan came from beneath their feet, like something old waking up. His eyes widened. The mine, he said sharply. The tunnels are hollow. The fighting has weakened them. Before he could move her away, the ground split with a terrible crack. The ledge beneath them gave way. The world tilted. They fell through dust and stone into darkness. When the noise finally stopped, the woman opened her eyes to see faint light filtering through cracks above. She was lying on her side, half buried in dirt. Her ears rang, her throat filled with dust. She coughed and tried to move. Are you there?" she whispered. "I'm here." The warrior's voice came from nearby, strained but steady. He pushed aside a fallen beam and crawled toward her. "Don't move too fast." The walls could give. They were inside the collapsed mine now, the air thick and stale. Faint tremors still shook the ground. From above came muffled shouts. The outlaws were still searching. The woman looked around, her eyes catching on something faintly glinting in the dim light. Silver veins running like rivers through the stone. She pointed to it. This is what they wanted. The warrior followed her gaze, then looked away. It's what destroyed them. It will destroy anyone who follows. She touched the silver, feeling the cold pulse of the metal beneath her fingers. It felt alive, humming faintly. My father said it was a gift from the earth. He shook his head. It is a curse for those who forget how to listen. Above them, voices grew louder. One man shouted, "Orders!" The sound of picks and boots echoed through the cracks. They were trying to dig their way in. The warrior glanced upward. "We need to move before they break through." They crawled through a narrow tunnel, guided by faint light and instinct. The air grew thinner, and every breath felt heavier. At times, they had to stop just to listen, unsure if the next sound was falling rock or approaching footsteps. At last, they reached a small chamber where the roof had partially collapsed. A shaft of light poured through from above. The woman looked up, her hope flickering. "We can climb." He nodded. But before they could start, another sound reached him, a voice echoing faintly down the tunnel. "You can't run forever." It was Deer Eyes. The warrior froze. His old friend's tone carried something cold and certain. "Come out, Deer," I said. "You can't save her. The white men will never stop." The map, the silver writ, belongs to the earth, not to them. Give her to me, and I will end this. The woman looked at the warrior, panic rising in her eyes. He's lying, she whispered. The warrior's face was unreadable. He believes what he says. Dear Eye's voice came again, closer now. You taught me that mercy is weakness. Have you forgotten? We fight for the land. This is the price of survival. The warrior stood slowly, his knife glinting faintly in the half-light. And you fight by serving those who broke it. A tense silence filled the tunnel. Dust drifted from above. Then came Dear Eye's quiet reply. I fight to keep what's left. The woman gripped the warrior's arm. Please, we have to go. He looked at her, then toward the shaft of light above them. The outlaws' voices were drawing near from one side. Dear Eyes was coming from the other. It was no safe direction, no promise of escape only. The rising hum of danger closing in from both ends. The warrior drew in a slow breath, his mind racing for a way out. Above them, the rumble of footsteps and the faint clatter of falling stones grew louder. The mine creaked like a dying animal. The woman whispered, What happens now? He looked at her, his eyes calm but burning with resolve. Now, he said quietly, we see who the earth chooses to keep. And as the voices drew closer and the silver walls gleamed faintly in the trembling light, the canyon above groaned once more, ready to decide the fate of those who had dared to dig too deep into its heart. The sunlight barely touched the canyon floor when the sound of hooves echoed again, slower now, deliberate. The woman and the warrior pressed themselves against the cold stone, their breaths shallow, hearts pounding in rhythm with the faint tremors beneath the earth. The air was heavy with dust and tension, each second stretching longer than it should. From where they crouched, the faint glimmer of silver still shimmered through cracks in the wall. It was both beautiful and cruel, a reminder of everything that had brought them here. The woman tried to look away from it, but it seemed to pull her eyes back every time, as if the metal itself whispered something she couldn't quite understand. They're close, the warrior murmured, his voice low and steady. They know the tunnels. She swallowed hard. Do they know we're down here? He hesitated. We'll soon. The sound carries. She looked toward the direction of Dear Eye's voice, still echoing faintly from the last tunnel they had passed. You really think he'd kill us? He'll do what he believes the spirits demand? The warrior said, his gaze fixed ahead. And the spirits he listens to now? They're angry. The woman tried to focus on breathing, but the air felt thin, each inhale bringing more dust than relief. Her hands trembled as she wiped dirt from her face. How did you know him? Once, he said after a pause. We fought the same war. We both lost our families to it. When the white men came for the land, we stood together. But when peace came, he saw no victory in it. He saw surrender. He chose to fight in other ways. She glanced toward him, his face half lit by the flickering lantern he carried. So now he hunts his own people? He nodded slowly. When a man loses everything, he finds something to blame. For him, that blame never ended. A faint sound cut through the silence, the scrape of boots on rock, not far behind. Both of them froze. The warrior motioned for silence, extinguishing the lantern.
Ow.
Darkness swallowed them whole. The woman could feel her pulse in her throat, could hear the faint rhythm of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. A voice spoke, distant but close enough to make the hairs on her arms rise. You can't hide from what's already claimed you, it said. It was Dear Eyes again, calm/steady, almost gentle. The mind remembers every trespass. The earth is patient, but it never forgets. The warrior whispered, Keep moving. They crawled through the narrow passage, the walls pressing close around them. The air was stifling, heavy with the scent of earth and rust. Every small movement sent tiny rocks sliding down, the sound magnified in the stillness. The woman's clothes were torn, her hands raw from the stone, but she didn't stop. She could hear the footsteps behind them now, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Dear Eyes was following, but not rushing. He knew they had nowhere to go. Finally, they reached a wider cavern. The ceiling arched high above, and water dripped from unseen cracks, the sound echoing softly. In the center of the space stood an old cart, half buried in rubble. The warrior lifted the lantern again, lighting the space just enough to see that the walls shimmered faintly with veins of silver. The woman stared. It's beautiful, she whispered. The warrior's face hardened. It's poison. Before she could reply, there was a faint metallic click from behind them. The sound of a gun being cocked. They both turned slowly. Dear Eyes stood at the mouth of the tunnel, his bow slung across his shoulder, a revolver in his hand. The lantern light flickered across his face, revealing eyes that looked more tired than cruel. "It doesn't have to end like this, Dear Eyes," said softly. "You don't belong here, neither of you. Then let us leave." Dear Eyes shook his head. "You can leave, but she can't." The woman's voice trembled. "Why? What do you want from me?" He looked at her, and for the first time there was something almost sorrowful in his gaze. "Your father's map led them here. It brought death to my people. The silver under this mountain was never meant to be found. She walks free, they'll come again. More men, more greed. It has to end." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "So you'll become what you hate." Dear Eyes didn't answer immediately. His hand shook slightly on the gun. "I'll become what's needed." For a moment, no one moved. The lantern flickered, shadows stretching long across the walls. The silence between them was heavy with years of loss and betrayal. Then, from somewhere above, came another deep groan, the mind shifting again. Dust fell from the ceiling. Cracks split through one of the silver walls with a low moaning sound. Dear Eyes glanced upward, lowering his weapon slightly. "It's too late anyway. The earth is chosen." The warrior seized the chance. He lunged forward, striking the gun aside. The shot went wild, ricocheting off the stone and igniting a rain of sparks. The two men grappled, their movements desperate and violent, the years of shared history breaking into raw fury. The woman stumbled backward, the lantern nearly falling from her hands. The fight was brutal, quick, and silent, except for the sound of fists striking flesh and the harsh rasp of breath. Dear Eyes was strong, but the warrior fought like a man with something left to protect. He slammed his shoulder into his opponent, forcing him back against the wall. But Dear Eyes twisted free and drew his knife. "You fight for her," he hissed, "but you don't understand. She carries the same hunger that destroyed us." The woman shouted, "Stop, please," but neither man listened. The ceiling above them groaned again, louder this time. A stream of dirt and rock poured down, scattering the light. The lantern flickered, its flame guttering low. Then a sharp crack split the chamber. The warrior turned toward the woman just as part of the ceiling gave way. He dove forward, grabbing her, pulling her toward the old cart for cover as a cascade of rocks thundered down. The noise was deafening. When it finally settled, the air was thick with dust. Coughing, the woman looked up. Dear Eyes was going to be buried somewhere under the fallen rock. The tunnel behind them was completely blocked. The warrior rose slowly, his face grim. "We can't go back." She looked around, panic creeping into her voice. "Then where do we go?" He pointed toward a faint glow coming from the far side of the cavern. "Forward, there's light ahead." They moved quickly, stumbling over rubble, the faint shimmer of silver guiding their way. The woman could hear faint sounds, wind, water, maybe even voices carried from the surface. Her heart pounded faster. But as they neared the glow, the ground began to tremble again. A deep, rhythmic vibration pulsed through the floor, stronger with each step. The silver in the walls began to vibrate, humming like a chorus of low voices. The warrior stopped, his expression darkening. "It's waking." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "The mine," he said. "The earth. Too much blood has been spilled here." A loud crack cut through the air, followed by another. The walls began to split, the veins of silver glowing faintly as dust rained down in shimmering waves. The sound was unbearable, a deep grinding roar that felt alive. The woman screamed as the floor shifted beneath her, but the warrior caught her arm, pulling her forward toward the light. Behind them, the cavern began to collapse. They ran, stumbling, dodging falling stone, every sound drowned by the thunder of the mountain tearing itself apart. The light grew brighter ahead, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw open sky. Then the rumble became a roar, and everything turned to dust and shadow. The last thing she felt was the warrior's hand gripping hers, refusing to let go. As the mountain above them decided whether it would bury them forever or finally let them see the sun again. When the dust finally settled, the world seemed to stand still. The woman opened her eyes to a dim glow above her, blinking through the haze. Her chest ached with each breath, and her ears rang from the deafening collapse. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why the air was so heavy. Then she felt warmth beside her and turned her head. The warrior lay just a few feet away, half buried under dirt and stone, his arms still stretched toward her. She crawled to him, her hands trembling. "Hey," she whispered, brushing dirt from his face. "You're still here. You have to be." He groaned softly, his eyes opening. The faintest smile crossed his lips. "The mountain spared us." Tears blurred her vision as she helped him sit up. "I thought we were gone." "Not yet," he said, his voice low but calm. "We're not finished." Around them, the cavern had changed. The silver veins no longer glowed. The walls were cracked, jagged, and silent. The faint light they had seen before still shimmered ahead daylight, pure and real, filtering through a narrow opening. The path was rough, but it was their only way out. The woman helped the warrior to his feet, his weight heavy on her shoulder. They moved slowly, every step echoing in the hollow space. As they reached the opening, cool air rushed against their faces, carrying the scent of pine and freedom. The woman almost laughed from relief. They climbed out onto the rocky slope, blinking in the sunlight that washed the canyon in gold. The mountain behind them was unrecognizably, its top scarred and broken, with plumes of dust still rising from the collapse. No voices followed them. The mine was sealed now, the silver buried again, silent beneath the earth. For a while neither spoke, as they walked toward a small ridge overlooking the valley, where the river wound like a silver thread through the trees. The world looked calm again, as if it had never witnessed the chaos below. The woman sat down, her body aching, her mind struggling to catch up with everything that had happened. "What about him?" she asked quietly. The warrior knew she meant Deer Eyes. He looked back toward the mountain. "He chose his end," he said after a moment. "He became part of what he was trying to protect." The woman lowered her head. "He thought he was saving the land." "He was," the warrior said softly. "But he forgot that saving something doesn't always mean destroying everything else." They sat in silence, letting the wind fill the space between their words. When they finally started walking again, the woman felt a strange calm settle over her. Every sound of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the call of a bird felt sharper, cleaner, like the world itself had drawn a deep breath. She thought about her father, the map, and all the men who had died chasing what lay beneath that mountain. It struck her how easily people could lose themselves to something that only shimmered on the surface. After a long walk, they reached the remnants of the camp where their journey had begun. The wagon was gone, and so were the horses. Only ashes and broken tools remained. The warrior crouched near the fire pit, touching the blackened wood. "They didn't stay," he said. "They'll think we're buried too." The woman knelt beside him. "Maybe that's better." He looked at her, studying her expression. "You'd disappear?" "Start over." She nodded slowly. "I think I have to. My father's map brought nothing but pain. If I can let it go, maybe the past will stop chasing me." He nodded, understanding. "The land will remember what the people forget. It always does." For the first time, she smiled, then let it remember peace this time. They gathered what little they could find, a canteen, a torn blanket, a bit of food that had survived in a metal box. The woman tied her hair back, her hands still shaking but her eyes steady. "Where will you go now?" she asked. The warrior looked toward the horizon where the desert met the sky. "Home, if there's any left. The land beyond the river still holds my people's stories. Maybe I can find what's left of them." "You think they'll take you back?" He gave a faint smile. "They don't have to. The land already has." She didn't know what to say to that. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. They had shared fear, blood, and silence, and though their paths had been forced together by chance, it no longer felt like chance. As evening came, they built a small fire. The woman wrapped the blanket around herself and watched the fading colors of the sky. The warrior sat beside her, sharpening a broken piece of flint absently. The firelight danced across his face, softening the harsh lines carved there by time and loss. "You saved me," she said quietly, "more than once." He shook his head. "No, we saved each other. It's how it's meant to be." She looked at him for a long time, realizing how much he had carried, how much he had lost, and how much of his strength came not from anger, but from understanding.
Oh.
The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. When night fell, stars stretched endlessly across the sky. The fire crackled, and the air grew colder. The woman spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think the silver will stay buried now?" The warrior looked into the flames. "As long as men don't come digging again, but they always do. Greed doesn't die easy." She frowned. "Then what's the point of all this? If the same mistakes will be made again." He glanced at her, his expression calm. "Maybe the point isn't to stop it forever. Maybe it's to remember what it costs." Those words stayed with her long after the fire died down. In the morning, they parted ways at the river. The woman's eyes lingered on him, wanting to say more, but knowing some things were better left in silence. He placed a hand over his heart, then over hers, a gesture that felt both ancient and final. "Walk with the earth," he said. "And you," she replied softly. He crossed the river without looking back, his figure growing smaller until he was just a shadow against the light. The woman watched until the last trace of him disappeared into the trees. Then she turned downstream, where the water curved toward the valley. She walked until the mountains faded behind her, and the sound of the river was the only thing left. Days passed. The world grew gentler again. She found her way to a small settlement at the edge of the desert, where no one knew her name. She traded what she had left for a simple room and began working in a place that overlooked the fields. Life returned in quiet ways: soft laughter, the scent of bread baking, the peace of sunrise over the hills. Sometimes she dreamed of the canyon and the silver that shimmered in the dark. But when she woke, she remembered the warrior's words. The cost, the choice to walk away. Years later, travelers still spoke about the cursed mountain where the earth swallowed men whole. Some said they could hear voices at night whispering under the stone. Others said they saw a figure walking the ridges at sunset, a tall man with long hair, moving like a shadow of the wind. The woman never confirmed those stories, but when she heard them, she would smile faintly, her eyes distant. She kept the memory of that journey like a small ember inside, her painful but alive, reminding her of what mattered most. Not the silver, not the maps, not the glory of discovery, but the strength it took to survive and let go. In time, the land healed. Grass grew where ash once lay, and the river carved new paths through the valley. The world forgot the names of those who had fought and died for what gleamed beneath the ground, but the earth remembered. It always did. And though she lived the rest of her life far from the mountain, every time she saw sunlight catch on water, she thought of that place, the buried silver, the man who saved her, and the truth that freedom sometimes meant walking away from what glittered most. It wasn't the ending she had imagined when the journey began. It was something quieter, something truer, a peace born not from victory, but from understanding that some treasures were never meant to be taken, only seen, then left for the earth to keep.